the decisions that I make today are going to impact my future.
Hey, y'all, and welcome. You're listening to the Cowgirl Confessions podcast. I'm your host, Dakota Dawn Johnson, small-town cowgirl with Southern roots, blazing a trail as a Midwest ranch wife, mama, and businesswoman. The mission of Cowgirl Confessions is to share the wonderfully wild and Western life stories of cowgirls from all walks of life. We'll talk about the highs, the lows, and everything in between when it comes to navigating careers, cowboys, kids, and cattle. Legendary cowgirl Dale Evans said it best. Cowgirl is a pioneer spirit, a special brand of American courage. The cowgirl faces life head-on, lives by her own lights, and makes no excuses. Cowgirls take stands. They speak up. They defend the things they hold dear. A cowgirl might be a rancher, a barrel racer, a bull rider, or an actress, but she's just as likely to be a checker at the local Winn-Dixie, a full-time mother, a banker, an attorney, or an astronaut. If you're into wet saddle blankets, talks with God, buckets full of laughter, and the life lessons learned in the process, kick off your boots and settle in. I pray these stories encourage, empower, and give you just the leg up you need. Here's to embracing the cowgirl state of mind, no matter how wild and Western life may get along the way. Hi there, friend. Welcome to the Cowgirl Confessions podcast. Let's kick off today with some gold buckle goodness, also known as a podcast review. Shall we? It means so much to me and truly makes a difference in the number of people we can reach when listeners like you take time to leave us a review. Our listener, Right Ranch Love, shared, Dakota always has the richest conversations with her guests that encourage and challenge me. Thank you, Right Ranch Love, for taking the time to leave such a kind review. And today's episode will not disappoint because it is full of rich conversation. You see, this episode is one we have pulled from the Cowgirl Confessions vault, going back to an episode recorded in 2021. Today, we are featuring Sarah Neal of Muldrow, Oklahoma. Now, you might be wondering, why are we resharing a portion of Sarah's episode? And it's twofold, friend. As we celebrate our 4-year anniversary here at the Cowgirl Confessions podcast, I want to highlight the women who believed in me early on when starting this podcast, the ones who gave up their time and energy and encouraged me even when I did not know what I was doing. They cheered me on simply because I was committed to figuring this podcast thing out as I went. They believed in the mission of the podcast and they showed up for me in numerous ways. Sarah Neal is one of the women who did just that for me. She entrusted me to share her cowgirl confession in a way that would make a difference. She's the epitome of a woman navigating careers, cowboys, kids, and cattle, and someone who I strive to be more like. Sarah is real, raw, and heartfelt as she shares her story. And better yet, if you ever get the chance to meet her in person, she's the same gal you see on the internet. I've said it for years. Women like Sarah and the wisdom she shares shouldn't be a best-kept secret. Now, while this episode only captures a small portion of our conversation from episode 17, I highly encourage you to go back and listen to both episodes 17 and 18. I promise you'll be glad you did. Now, if you're a listener that comes from a rodeo background, the last name Neal in conjunction with Muldrow, Oklahoma, most likely made your ears perk up. And if you're not as familiar with the rodeo scene, that's okay too. I'm going to share why that name most likely piques some interest. Sarah is no newcomer to rodeo. Her grandfather was a college rodeo coach, and she is married to well-known cowboy Chris Neal. Chris has a deep understanding of roping, and that's from being both a fierce competitor and event producer for many years. Chris and his team at CNProductions have produced top-notch ropings for over a decade, like the Oklahoma's Richest, Rising Stars, and Rope for the Crown, to name a few. A new event that CNProductions has added to the lineup for 2024 is the Kimes Ranch $1 Million Breakaway Roping. I just have to pause for a minute. It gives me chills just to even say that out loud. $1 Million Breakaway Roping. Okay. This is so exciting for so many reasons. One of them being that history is literally being made with this event. And while I would enjoy diving into all the details surrounding that upcoming event, that's not what today's podcast is about. So I'm going to keep it short, brief here, and just say a few things. The first qualifier for the Kimes Ranch $1 million breakaway roping will take place in Guthrie, Oklahoma in October. And then the last chance qualifier, along with the actual $1 million breakaway roping, that takes place at Westworld in Scottsdale, Arizona, November 27th through 30th. So you can find all the details surrounding those events on CNProductions.com or the $1million breakaway.com. We'll be sure to list those in the show notes. Okay, so back to Sarah and Chris. So Sarah and Chris's mission with CN Productions is this: to promote the sport of rodeo and the youth of our industry by producing the largest youth calf roping event in the world. They offer family-friendly tradition full of excitement for the whole family. CN Production events gives families and spectators alike a place for Western entertainment and shopping. Their goal is to provide a professional production for our contestants to compete on a large stage, to promote sponsors to the highest level possible. Man, they've got it figured out, and they're doing an excellent job at that, you guys. If you've ever been to one of their events, been to their website, you can tell, it is top notch. And what I want to say about that is it takes a special kind of person, a rare breed, if you will, to say yes and figure out how to pull together any event of that caliber, and especially one like the Kimes Ranch $1 million breakaway roping. I love learning and just being around those kind of people like Chris Neal, watching how they go about things, how they think, kind of being a fly on the wall. Okay. But you want to know who my favorite person is to watch? I like connecting with and getting to watch the person that is supporting that person on the front line. The one that's oftentimes behind the scenes, but they're helping keep all the cylinders firing. They're doing all the work that nobody really even knows about. And most importantly, they're encouraging the person that's on the front lines. And I pray you enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed recording it. Sarah is an absolute gem and one that our Western industry is blessed to have. We laughed and cried together recording this. It's quite the cowgirl confession, my friend. Sarah, thank you for agreeing to share your story with us today. And I'm just really eager to learn more about you and your journey. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, Dakota. Well, thank you so much for having me. I have just really been looking forward to this ever since you reached out. And I think that what you're doing is phenomenal. And, I love seeing your heart to share stories and just being a storyteller. I think that's such an amazing gift. I wish I had that gift. But, you have just made me feel so special from day one. And I love seeing you just celebrate and promote other women in the Western industry and just this way of life and how passionate you are about it. And I just appreciate the opportunity. So I'm excited.
Well, thank you for your kind words. We all need cheerleaders. And that's one thing I've realized through, just this storytelling is that there's lots of cheerleaders out there, and social media and this podcast just give us a way to connect, on a different level. So I guess, Sarah, we'll just kind of get started. If you could just share with us kind of like where you're from and what life looks like for you currently.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm originally from Claremore, Oklahoma, which is just a little town northeast of Tulsa. And I came from a rodeo family. I was raised in a rodeo family. My grandpa is in the Rodeo Hall of Fame. He was rodeoed in the PRCA. He was a bulldogger. He coached rodeo at the college level. So I just grew up around it. I grew up loving horses, riding horses. I grew up competing. I junior rodeoed for a really long time. And then eventually being from a family of 6 kids, financially, it just wasn't feasible for my parents anymore. And so they made the decision to kind of pull me back a little bit from that. And so I got into a less expensive sport, which was basketball. And so that kind of replaced my passion for rodeo and gave me something to be passionate about. And I was able to go to college on a scholarship for that. But the love for rodeo and the Western way of life, I just felt like it was bred into me, and it's something that I've always loved, something I've always appreciated. And what's so funny is like growing up, even though, after I kind of got out of it, a lot of people in my family still rodeo to this day. But there was always something in my heart that kind of like just drew me back to it. I don't know if you guys remember, or I'm sure everyone knows who the pioneer woman is, but somebody, Ree Drummond, and somebody bought me her book. And I was in college at the time. And I remember reading it and just her story of how she fell in love with the cowboy. And I can remember being like, Lord, I got to put this book down because, like, my heart, like, there was something in my heart that stirred so much. I was like, why do I want this so bad for myself? Like, I just didn't, like, my grandma was always, she would always tell me, she's like, honey, just don't marry a cowboy. Don't marry a cowboy. She's like, I don't know. I don't know if you want that life. Even though she loved it, she knew how hard it was. And she knew, she knew what a commitment it was and different things like that. And so she would tease and things like that. But when I read that book, it was just weird how, something just started in my spirit. And so even though I never saw myself going back into that lifestyle, God had a different plan. I think that was kind of his way of just preparing my heart for the plans that he had for me in the next season of life. And so after college, before college, I moved to Washington, D.C. That's where I did my first internship for a corporate PR firm there. My degree is in journalism and PR. And being in that corporate setting, I always kind of loved politics. And I thought, what a fun way to, mix my career with something that I really enjoy. And honestly, what I saw surprised me. So working at that corporate PR firm, I thought, it's so weird because when you think like, oh, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, this is what I've gone to school for, and you like invest so much time and energy in it. And then you step into it and all of a sudden you're around people who do what you want to do for a living or what you thought you wanted to do. I was really left disappointed. And there was just different values that I had in my life and different things. I still wanted to get married and be a wife and have kids. And, nobody was kind of living that life that was in a position that I would have been working to get. And so I really felt conflicted. I was like, oh, why would I have all these passions in my heart and these desires and then get over here and then be like, wait a second, I don't think I want to do this. I don't think this is for me. I was just kind of in an in-between stage. And so I moved back home and I got another internship locally and then finished out my degree. And I moved overseas about 6 weeks after I graduated college. And I took a job in South Wales, about 3 hours outside of London. And I loved it. I worked there for 2 years and it was a really great experience. And then when I came back from that, that's when probably about 2 years after that, that's when I met Chris. So if you want me to tell the story of how we met, though, that's kind of a good one.
Oh my gosh, yes. And I'm just sitting here like mind blown kind of at so many things you said and the experiences you were already having at really such a young age. I mean, the fact that you went to Washington, D.C. and you got to see very early on, even though it put you at a crossroads, kind of internally, there's some of us that, you can go half your life working to get in a position that you've always wanted and then realizing that, like, what a God thing, what a blessing that you got to see that so early on to where you could be working through those feelings like you just shared.
Yeah, exactly. It really was a gift from God. And even working overseas, it was kind of like, I feel like when you're young and you're in your 20s and you're deciding, what am I going to do with my life? You're trying to just gather up, what do I like? What do I enjoy? What am I good at? You almost feel that pressure of like the decisions that I make today are going to impact my future. And if you're in that position, you're listening to that today, I just want you to have peace because I'm going to tell you what, like, you're never going to have it all figured out. And I used to worry, like, I used to think, like, oh my gosh, like, why would I go do this here and then do something like find out that that's not really what I want and then feel like, oh my gosh, I wasted my time. Or maybe I got it wrong, maybe I heard wrong, or maybe, maybe I'm just so confused. But just like what you said, it really was a gift being able to have that experience. And what's so great is all these experiences that I had that kind of felt like almost like they didn't lead to anywhere. When I look back at my life, I can tell you every single one of those experiences was something that God used to prepare me for where I'm at right now. And even though, in the time you just don't see it and it feels like, oh, this was for nothing, or how much time did I waste, or those type of things. I think, the cliche thing is people say, hindsight is 2020. But the truth is that God has a plan. And, he says that our footsteps are ordained by him. And so even though I didn't know where those footsteps were leading, God knew. And every step I took out of faith and every step, every prompt that I led, that I followed through on. And when I was faithful to, the things that he had put in front of me, it's so awesome how he just orchestrated all of it as preparation for what he was going to launch me into. And so, I hope that encourages somebody because, even in my times now when I think sometimes like, oh my gosh, I don't have it figured out, or what am I going to do next, or something like that, I always can look back at those times in my life of all the things that God used to set me up for where he has me now. So,
absolutely. Reflection, being able to reflect, and see so much, in the rear view can really help us going forward, with that windshield view. And just thank you so much for sharing, all those pieces of your story that led up to you eventually meeting your husband, Chris.
When it comes to shopping, I love to shop small, and supporting business owners who are also cowgirls is even better. High Call Outfitters, located in Great Bend, Kansas, is owned and operated by my mentor and cowgirl friend, Julie Miller. Being immersed in the Western lifestyle herself, Julie has a unique understanding of cowboy and cowgirl needs, both in and out of the arena. High Call's curated collection of apparel and footwear focuses on bringing fit, function, and fashion together so you can look and feel your best. From corporate cowgirl looks that will have everyone in the office asking, "Where did you get your outfit?" to rodeo-ready attire that equips you with extra confidence as you back in the box to every occasion in between. You're sure to find something special for everyone on your list at High Call Outfitters. Visit their website at highcalloutfitters.com or stop by their beautiful brick and mortar location if you're ever traveling through Great Bend, Kansas. Remember, friend, High Call has it all.
So the first time I met Chris, this would have been, oh my gosh, almost 15 years ago now. But the first time I met him was when I was in college, and my aunt had messaged me. She was on the rodeo committee at the rodeos around here in Tahlequah. And she was like, "Hey, I'm in charge of, the grand entry, and somebody was supposed to be here to set pivots and she can't come." She's like, "I need you to come." And I was like, oh my gosh, like, do you know how long since I rode a horse? Like, I don't even know if I can still do it anymore. But I was like, okay, like, all right, this will just be fun. So I grabbed my sister and we went to the rodeo, and it was a good time. And after the rodeo was over, my cousin was like, "Hey, I'm going to introduce you to this person or whatever." And I was like, okay, because we like the rodeo was over. We didn't know what we're going to do. It's a small town. There's nothing to do around there. And he introduced me to this guy named Chris Neal. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, of course, this was at a time in my life where I was kind of in church, but just occasionally. And I was kind of at a place in my life where I was, trying to figure things out and, wasn't really super firm or established in my faith. I really wasn't living that out. And of course, Chris wasn't either, but he won the rodeo that night. And my sister and I, we were like, what are we going to do? So we're like, we don't really, we don't have anything to do. So we had our horse trailer there, and, we were just going to stay the night there because Tahlequah was, almost 2 hours from home for us. And he wanted to celebrate. And so literally we're just the last two horse trailers in the parking lot. It's kind of how it ended up. So we started hanging out, and it was just me and my sister and him. And, we had too much to drink, but we were having, we were just having ourselves a time. Well, we ran out of beer. And so we were like, Chris is like, let's go get more beer. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay. So we get in his truck and I drove, and we just went to the little gas station that was just right up the way. And I don't know how much I can tell of this, but hopefully I don't offend anybody.
You share whatever you want to share.
Okay. But anyway, my sister and I had to go to the bathroom. So we went to the bathroom, and it was after 2:00 in the morning. So in Oklahoma, they wouldn't sell us any beer. And so the next thing I know, Chris walks into the bathroom with a 30-pack underneath his arm that he had went around to the back storage and got in the gas station. And me and my sister are like, oh my gosh. And he just cracks one open. He's like, here you go. And I'm like, okay, first of all, you're in the women's restroom. Second of all, where did you get that beer? And then the next thing I know, the manager is beating on the bathroom door. He's like, I saw you go in there with that. He's like, I've already called the cops. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I cannot go to jail. Okay. So my sister and I, we were just like panicked. We run outside. So me and Chris are like, we're out of here. Okay, we are out of here. So I'm like, Chris, get in the truck, get in the truck. And so me and him run and we get in the truck. My sister, God love her. She's so honest and so good hearted. Like she did not want us to steal the beer. And so she was trying to pay for it. She had Chris's wallet. She was trying to pay for it. And the guy at the front, he's like, I've already called the cops. He's like, y'all are going to jail. And Jessica's like literally throwing money on the thing, like, just please take this. And so I ran in there and I'm like, Jessica, get in the car. Like, I'm not worried about paying for this, but I'm like, we're not going to jail. So she jumped in the truck and we drove back to the arena as fast as we could. And as soon as we pulled into the arena, here come the sirens. And so I just saw police cars and I was like, oh my gosh, my life is over. Like, my parents are going to kill me. Like, I just started thinking of all the worst things, like who's going to bail me out of jail. So I just killed the engine and they, instead of pulling into the arena, they pulled into the gas station. And I was like, nobody move, like nobody say anything. And so we sat there for a minute until they left. And anyway, we got away with it. But we went back to his horse trailer and, you know, he was just on cloud nine. He was just still going to have a good time. He was going to party. He was going to celebrate. And I looked at my sister and I said, we are getting out of here. I said, this guy is trouble. Like, I don't care if he's got his name all up on the side of his horse trailer. I don't care who he is. I was like, this ain't happening. And of course, that was back in the day before, you know, Facebook and all that kind of stuff. So we didn't even exchange numbers. You know, we couldn't follow each other or anything. There was no social media. So anyway, that just ended up being this funny story that my sister and I told, you know, like, oh, remember that night we ran from the cops and, you know, all this other stuff. And so 6 years after that, obviously a lot had transpired. I had done my internships. I'd lived overseas. I'd graduated college. I'd done all those things we already talked about. And I was at a really good place in my life, just in my relationship with the Lord. And I was on staff at a church. And, you know, I was just at a very surrendered place in my life. And what was so cool is, you know, every day when I went to work, I did some like media type of stuff for the church. And I had an office there. And so every morning when I would go to the office, I would just be the only one there. And the things that impressed upon my heart that I was praying for was I wanted a career. I wanted a career opportunity because I knew I wasn't going to work at the church forever. I wanted a husband. I was 27 at the time. And I also wanted a mentor. I had a desire in my heart to be in business. And I'd had a word over my life that I was going to be in business. And I just was like, okay, Lord, these are the things you've put in my heart. This is what I'm going to pray over every day. And I just showed up to work and I just prayed over it, not really knowing how that would manifest or what that would look like. And so one day, the Claremore Rodeo, the Will Rogers Rodeo on Memorial Day weekend, my sisters were like, let's go out. You know, we're going to go to the rodeo just for kicks. And then we're going to go we call it the Racino, which is like our casino place where we live. Like, we're going to go there afterward. And I was like, well, okay, you know, but I wasn't really into it. I was just kind of like, well, I don't really have anything else to do. So I'm going to go. So I didn't go to the rodeo, but I met him up at the casino afterwards. And Chris had won the rodeo that night. And he was supposed to meet up with some friends in Tulsa, and that didn't work out. So he was headed back to Muldrow. And on his way back to Muldrow, he sees the Racino over on the left. And there's cars out there, you know, it's just not really popping. But like, he's like, I just won. I'm going to go in here and, you know, have a drink or celebrate or whatever. I'm going to see what's going on. He didn't want to just go home. And so he pulls in there. And he walks into that casino, and I was kind of over on the dance floor area. He said I was sitting on top of a table, and I was just sitting there hanging out. My sisters and everybody was all dancing, and I was just sitting there by myself. And he said, I saw you, and I just walked right over to you. He said, I just knew I was going to, you know, buy you a drink. He said, if I could have picked one person out of that room, it was you. And so he came over to me, and he asked me if he could buy me a drink. And I'm telling you, I would have never picked him out of the room. I would have never recognized his face, but I recognized his voice. And I said, what's your name? And he said, Chris Neal. And I said, I thought so. I said, you don't remember me, do you? And he said, no, I don't. And I could tell he got real nervous. And I said, well, let me remind you. So I told him about that night. I reminded him and he goes, oh my God, that was you and your sister. And I said, yes. And he was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. You just went to apologize. And I was like, no, it's all good, but I just kind of had him pegged in the beginning, of who he was and what he was about. And so anyway, we just kind of had a good time that night and reconnected. And for whatever reason, I did give him my phone number that night, but with no intention of following through or anything like that. And if anybody listening to this knows my husband, they know that he is the most persistent person on the planet. And he knows how to get what he wants. That's why he's so good in business. But he's so persistent. And so after that night, he would call me and I was just like, like I said, in such a good place in my relationship with the Lord where I was just like, God, this is the last thing I need is some little cowboy Casanova trying to call me and take me out to dinner. And but like, this is not what I'm about, like at all. Like I want a man of God. I know exactly what I want. I know who I want. I'm like, I got the highest standards and he don't even come close to touching them. I just kept kind of before the Lord, but I kind of wrote it off like this is not going to go anywhere. It's not that big of a deal, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, he was so persistent and he kept calling me and he kept calling me and kept calling me. And so I was like, oh my gosh. And so finally he was going to be in my area and he's like, can I just take you out to dinner? And I was like, sure. So I agreed to go out with him. It was on a Tuesday night and we went and shot pool somewhere and we ate dinner. There was nothing to do, but we just had the best time. Like we laughed. I can't even describe it. It was like a night out with my best friend. And it was the weirdest thing. But he said in his mind, he said, I knew from that Tuesday night, he said, I knew that I was going to marry you. And of course, I did not know that early. I was not convinced. But he pursued me very hardcore. And, we kind of kept talking and kept talking. And it got to the point where I was like, I could tell he was really serious and he was all about it. And my heart was just like, God, I don't know, like, how could this be what you have for me? This is not what I pictured, different things like that. But I was like, Lord, if I'm not going to make a move unless you confirm this for me or unless I feel like this is truly the direction that you're leading me. And so I'll never forget, we were in his horse trailer one time after a rodeo and he was like, I wish you would just give me a chance. Just give me. And I said, look, I have to be honest with you. I said, I know exactly what I want in a man. I've waited a really long time. I'm not settling. And I just kind of laid down the law. And I said, look, this is what I want. I need a man who is going to church. I need a man who loves God more than he loves me, who pursues him first. I want a man who tithes. I'm like listing off all these things that I'm sure you like made him want to throw up at the time. But, this is what I want. And he just looked at me and he said, will you give me a chance to be that for you? And, it makes me emotional talking about it.
Yeah, I'm like teary eyed over here too.
In that moment, yeah, I said, okay, I'll give you a chance. And, honestly, from that day, he never disappointed me. He really stepped up. And, the way he tells it, he said, I'm telling you, he said, there's only one girl out there for every man that would make a man change. And he said, you were that person for me. And he said, I knew it. He said, I knew I couldn't let you go. So that was kind of the beginning of our journey. And, we were engaged within 6 months and married within a year. And we moved here to Muldrow and, we had our little single wide house trailer that he had lived in for probably 15 years before he met me. So I really just moved from one house trailer to another. His house trailer was a lot nicer than mine. So we moved here and started our life with almost nothing. I had my brand new baby business and he had his, and his was, he had been working on his business for about 10 years when I came along. And so it was still in its kind of beginning stages. But, together we just made a commitment that we wanted to honor the Lord with our money and with our businesses. And so, Chris started tithing for the first time in his life. And that was huge. That was huge for his business and for what, the favor that we saw God pour out on him after making that decision. And we just kind of committed it to the Lord. We did the whole Dave Ramsey thing. And we said, we wrote down all of our debt, 6 figures worth of debt. and we wrote it all down on a piece of paper and we taped it to the wall in our little house trailer. And we said, we're going to do this. We're going to be faithful and we're going to live on a budget and we're going to save our money and we're going to pay off our debt. And we are going to save up a down payment to build, the home of our dreams. And so that's what we did. And it took us a little over 5 years to do that. And a lot kind of happened along the way.
Thank you for spending your time with me on the Cowgirl Confessions podcast. I'm so glad y'all stopped by. If you could take a moment to share this episode and tag us on social media, I'd be happier than a cowgirl in a sea of buy one, get one vintage turquoise. Subscribe to make sure you don't miss an episode. New episodes will be released bi-monthly. Please leave us a review if you feel so led by going to iTunes. Your feedback will really help us breed the idea of grabbing life by the horns with a cowgirl state of mind into women across the globe. Some that may have never even had the privilege to throw their leg over a horse, but could most certainly use the cowgirl state of mind while navigating life. Thanks again, y'all. Until next time, keep pursuing your dreams with that all go and no woe mentality. Remember, you're writing a story that's worth saddling up for, sister.